welcome to our second Praxis COVID-19 discussion. The last conversation I had was a great privilege because I was actually able to sit down on my late night and talk across the world with the InSEA executive about the issues a couple of weeks ago that we were now facing, as we're now into a global pandemic at a different stage of the world, as we see quite horrendous numbers of deaths across the world, but also some amazing changes that have happened in education to support what a healthy, resilient and creative world might look like. It seems a difficult time, but also an exciting time to talk about what the place of art education is and the role that arts educators and artists and arts practitioners are playing to support young people, but also support intergenerational communities through art. So I'm Kate Coleman. I'm a World Councillor for the Southeast Asia Pacific for InSEA. We are a UNESCO association and interested in supporting our members, but also the wider art education community. So this conversation you'll be seeing either today in your Facebook or Twitter feeds, or maybe in the InSEA web pages. And we invite you to contribute to that conversation and to share your resources, to share your own stories, and to have a think with the amazing people that I share this conversation with today, and maybe some of the provocations that they open for you and how you might choose to respond to that. So the first thing that I gave these people that I'm going to talk with today was this kind of idea around the unprecedented times for art education. And so art educators are facing a change into remote teaching, some for the first time in their careers, and many of our students for the first time in their lives outside of an art studio, into setting up a studio at home, wherever they can, with whatever kind of materials they can, or with some wonderful materials that have been sent home by art educators to learn and at the same time to alleviate their anxieties and fears around the things that are happening in their worlds. We've seen art teachers jump really quickly at a fast pace into thinking differently about what their participatory, their collaborative and their embodied learning in studios looks like at home. I've seen lots of teachers on Facebook creating brown bags of materials in their holidays here in Australia before they've returned to school. And we've seen stories out of the Northern Hemisphere of teachers doing the same, with kids doing drive-by lunch pickups and art materials at the same time. So I invited these people to have this conversation with me today in two different parts of the world, to have a think about what our commonalities are, but also what some of our differences might be. And I've posed them these two questions. What are your online pedagogic practices, and how can these support our art education colleagues in this shift to remote teaching and learning? And secondly, what online and digital art education stories give them hope, inspiration and joy? And within that question, what they reveal about the possibilities for online art education in the pandemic and beyond, because we know that school will not return the same way, and what an opportunity there is for us to think about what these possibilities are, we now get to discuss.
So my name is Jonathan Silverman. I live in Vermont in the USA, which is in the Northeast, just south of the Canadian border. For 25 years, I was the coordinator of arts education at St. Michael's College and chair of the department, teaching courses in creative process, interdisciplinary curriculum, aesthetics, environmental art. I recently retired and now teach part-time. I was a visiting professor at Doshisha University in Japan in the fall. I have helped schools, failing schools, turn into arts magnet schools in the area. I've taken students abroad and kind of hopefully raise their horizons. I'm a ceramicist. I love the play between symmetry and asymmetry. I also mess around with watercolors. I sing in 3 choruses and danced my dissertation.
Fantastic. Welcome. I'm just going to mix up my order, so you're just going to have to go with me. Abby, hello.
Oh, hi there. Nice to be here with new familiar faces as well. So my name is Abby McDonald and I work at the University of Tasmania in arts education. So University of Tasmania, for anyone who doesn't know, is an island state off the bottom of Australia, and it's also known as Lutruwita in our Palawa First Nations name. So we are an island off a bigger island, and yeah, in an interesting time alongside everyone else at the moment with how the world is. But a little bit about myself, I'm a painter, oil painter primarily. I deal with people as sort of my subject in my painting, but people in place. So increasingly moving into looking at the things that people do in different places and the relationality between people and place. My research is very much interested in artographic practice and relational pedagogy and enabling and supporting people to make new meaning through art. And a lot of that too is looking at people who might not necessarily consider themselves to be artists. So how do we sort of support people to yield and have the benefits of what making and knowing and doing through art bring us? So it's actually been interesting at the moment just to take a bit of a deep dive back into who I am and how I work, and looking at the practice of my colleagues teaching art making in all sorts of different places, and just thinking about how we do things. We have to do things differently, but also interesting to look at the ways I think artists have navigated a range of different challenges and adversities and bring a real strength and resilience from that, and trying to find ways to communicate some of those strategies or transfer them into different contexts to help educators who might not necessarily be arts educators. So that's probably, I'm a mum, got 2 little kids, I'm juggling that, I've got them at home doing school while I'm doing work, and we just make that work however best we can.
Yes, we do. Thank you for joining us then. Jonathan, no, you've already introduced yourself. Because I've changed my order, I'm writing off my notes. Alan, good morning.
Good evening. Yes. Well, it's good to join everyone there. I'm Alan Richards, and I live in Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. I'm a professor at the University of Kentucky. I am the program faculty chair for art education. I'm originally from Jamaica, studied in Jamaica, Mexico, and then here in the United States. My research is in cognitive processes and functions as it relates to learning. I also apply that to Alzheimer's disease. I've got a couple of studies going in Alzheimer's disease as far as that is concerned. I am also an artist, not practicing regularly at this juncture. Art education. I just have a book. We just had a book published, Steve and myself, Global Consciousness Through the Arts, a passport for students and teachers. And this pandemic has really brought it home to me that we are on the right track in terms of what the new normal might be. We can learn quite a bit from that in terms of the sustainability of humanity. We have to help each other in order to advance society in a way, the global community. We are seeing that it is a global community, and the challenges I believe, is suited for art educators to lead in that respect. So I'm coming to this from a perspective that I want to make sure that our teachers, as I train them, go out there not to maintain the status quo, but to change the paradigm in in education to prepare young people for a global community that must be just, must be fair, must respect cultures, and must help to maintain the environment so that everyone can enjoy it.
Thank you, Alan. This is when you know you're in the right place, when the first three introductions let you know that you're like hanging with your people for an hour. Bill, hello.
Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for asking me to be here today. Alan, that was wonderful. Yes, I too felt some affinity with what you just said. So I'm Bill Baker. I'm a senior lecturer at UTAS in Launceston. For those of you who don't know Tasmania, it's really next stop Antarctica, and Launceston is in the north of the state on the side of the Tamar River. My qualifications are both in music and fine art, and before I joined UTAS, I was a school-based music educator for about 17 years, working with all ages from primary through secondary. For the last 14 years or so, I've taught arts ed to pre-service teachers in the Bachelor of Education and Master of Teaching degrees. UTAS was one of the first universities in Australia to move really seriously into the online space, and the School of Education, where I work, and Marianne and Abby, was initially a real leader in that fully online pre-service teacher space. My teaching practice and my aligned research focuses on helping online students to learn experientially and actively, to help them to make in both music and visual arts, to record and to share their creations, and finally to reflect on these and to apply them to practical teaching spaces. So that's me.
Thank you very much. Amanda, hello.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Alexander, and I'm an associate professor and program coordinator of art education, as well as the assistant chair of the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Texas Arlington, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas Metroplex. I have a bachelor's degree in business marketing and graphic design from Indiana University, Bloomington, both my master's in cultural policy and a PhD in arts administration, education, and policy from the Ohio State University. I have worked with local, state, and federal organizations in different arts-based capacities. I taught art to high school kids in Columbus, Ohio, and taught art and English in Peru as a Peace Corps volunteer. I also worked with Peruvian artists to develop their business capacity and began a store, a bricks and mortar store in the city of Cajamarca, Peru, for which the artists now own and run. My research includes community arts-based practices, working with pre-service art educators locally here in Dallas-Fort Worth, and continuing my work with artists in Peru. I've written and published on various Peruvian art forms, traditions, and cultural heritage. I've used autoethnography to write about my own experiences working with artists in Peru. I analyzed the fair trade movement in Peru and how that might affect artists there, and developed a sustainable artist-run cooperative business using participatory action research. I've also published articles on my service learning with students here in DFW, and using art therapy to heal veterans' psychological and emotional distress. So that's me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Marianne, hello.
Hi, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm Marianne. I've got the absolute delight of working with Abby and Bill at the University of Tasmania, but at a different location. So I'm also on Lutruwita, which is the First Nations name and grounding for this island. And I live in Hobart, which is the capital city, which is even closer to Antarctica than Abby and Bill are. And I'm feeling that this morning, let me tell you. I just want to acknowledge that Indigenous worldviews have had my own growth in walking a path with colleagues and friends who are engaging with the colonialisation of knowledge, and the colonised way in which we've approached arts education has made a major impact on my work and my thinking in this space. I come to this as a drama educator, previously a drama educator, and continuing to be a drama educator. And I'm really glad to be in this forum because it's been one of the major challenges in shifting to online as an embodied educational practice. So I'll look forward to touching base with that a little bit later. My work has mainly been in school support around arts education, and previously to joining UTAS, I worked as a coordinator of a program which was supporting young people, Indigenous young people who were in their education, who were in the justice system, to be supporting their transition from the justice system into schooling. So it was an alternative education program. Also have worked with the peace and conflict studies area and the kind of intersections between arts education and peace and conflict studies. And I'm part of a global collective of artists, conflict workers, funders, educators called Impact. And we've been doing a process of learning exchanges among artists and conflict workers. And our most recent one, where we were expecting probably about 150 people to join us, given the numbers that we'd had in our previous learning exchanges, talking about the intersections of arts, conflict, arts, culture and conflict transformation. Last week we had over 700 participants from 63 countries join us to discuss the opportunities, the potential, the limitations and the engagements that we were having with this intersection of arts and conflict transformation, and the way that was helping artists and communities to build resilience. And there were many conversations that were weaved through that about arts education. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here and be part of the energy of this organisation as well in naming up some of these ways we can be supporting each other's collectively across the planet.
Wonderful, thank you. And lucky last, Professor Steve Willis, who is an important part of InSEA Executive as Vice President. Hello.
I think you give me too much importance. Hello, my name is Steve Willis, actually. This is my second term as an InSEA Vice President, so I'm happy to be here. And I see my Australian friends that I saw at the introduction of the webinar that Kate had some time past, so I'm glad to see you again and see that you're healthy in this really challenging time. I work at Missouri State University, which is in Missouri, the central part of the United States. I've been teaching for 44 years. I spent 23 of those 44 years teaching secondary. Presently, I have resigned my position as coordinator undergraduate and graduate studies in art education. So now I'm back in faculty and enjoying that quite a bit. I'm happy to see each of you, and Marianne, we follow a similar research agenda. Being Native American heritage, I'm very sensitive to cultural misappropriation. I'm very sensitive to colonized storytelling that diverts the truth of the indigenous people. So I have published and researched quite a bit of that. And most recently, I have switched to contextual narrative and storytelling through the visual arts. I'm a proponent that art teachers should be artists as well. And I resist the idea that art teachers don't need to be practicing artists. So I make a lot of friends that way. I make some enemies that way as well. In the book that Ellen and I wrote, we talked a lot about breaking down the silos and separation of disciplines. I'm strongly committed to that idea of an integrated classroom that's interrelational and interactive across multiple disciplines. And I think the art educators are set in a very important position to see that Renaissance weaving come back to contemporary time. So I'm looking forward to seeing your publications in the InSEA, and just a shout out for that we like our new and returning friends in InSEA. So thank you for that. Thank you, Kate, for the invitation to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. So I guess what I'm hearing all the way through the threading of this conversation is something that's pinning us down into what a socially just arts education might look like. And so if we think about now the question I posed you around your online pedagogic practices, I'm really interested to hear what that socially just, agile, innovative, creative connections might be in there. And in that second part of the question, how we might support our colleagues in this shift at the moment.
Well, you can see from my image that I am not a net native, so I'm having to learn as I go. As a friend of mine, I'm building the bicycle while I'm riding it. So it's been an interesting challenge, but also exciting opportunity. One of the things I did discover with my undergrad students, the ones who are practicing now at their internship, is I made the error of assuming they were all net natives, and they're not. And they were also struggling with developing content that they could deliver through a different platform. And it's interesting to see how they've resolved some of those situations, from online demonstrations to virtual chat rooms with their students, providing the student teachers with a much larger repertoire as they move into the new era and the new profession of how to teach both in physical space and in virtual space. So that was an exciting awareness for me to see them with some similar issues about technology. One of the things I'm concerned about is in our region, and Kate's already alluded to it, is we have a fairly high level of poverty. And one of our art teachers would have in the students, in the children's bag lunches, because they're on free and reduced lunch, as the parents drove through to get that lunch for their child every day, the art teacher put in art materials and then some challenging prompts for their students. So they were getting the materials delivered every day through this lunch bag program, because these students do not have any kind of connectivity. They don't have smartphones, they don't have tablets, they don't have internet at home. So when we went out of physicality into the virtual space, they had no connectivity whatsoever. So one of the things that was exciting, a joyful story, Kate, for you to mark my joy marker, is that we do find ways to continue what we do and the value that we bring to the art making process. And finally, my concern globally from the end of what this pandemic might bring is that we somehow find a way to maintain our civility and our humanity. I really fear that could get diluted through the screen and through alternative forms of content. So I'm very thirsty to be with my students again. I see them every week, like I'm seeing you, but somehow it's a little bit anemic. I'm really missing, because I read energy and I can't get as much energy through the screen as I would like. Okay, that's my 3 minutes.
Awesome. I can feel your energy though, Steve Willis. Thank you. Abby.
Lovely. That was really awesome, Steve. I feel you on that energy front of being able to, it's interesting. A lot of the work that I've been doing has been online anyway. And I think just given the climate and circumstances, I'm actually feeling a lot more interconnection between the group themselves and with myself, but it's happening in different ways. So some of the pedagogical things that I've been leaning really hard into at the moment has been Neil Nonning's pedagogy of care, relational pedagogy. So I've been actually going back, and I think I mentioned at the start there, just that this is a real time of introspection, but also relational, making connections with people and making sure everyone's okay. So revisiting some of that sort of core pedagogy that sort of underpins my work anyway has been really important, and being able to share that with peers who are having made a really kind of sudden pivot to online from face to face. I've been supporting a few colleagues through the trauma of that. And some of those ethics of care, that pedagogical practice that's grounded, that's been really helpful for them, so they have been telling me. And I've been looking back into some of my own learning, of course, around how to work in the online space, and Julie Salmon's work around scaffolding communities for learning and teaching through conversation has been really nice to revisit that, and again be able to share some of those web resources with colleagues. And I'll give you all of these resources, of course, Kate, that I've been looking at. And just with my online students, getting them to, they've been leaning back into their practice quite a bit, but finding that incredibly difficult. But that in itself has been really important, because they've been able to make connections there between the struggle in their creative practice, and they know how to work through that. So they're then able to translate that over to being able to troubleshoot and navigate what it feels like to learn at the moment, which is really quite different, even for students who are adept at that being online students. And two resources that have brought me joy that I would share is, I should have mentioned, as I'm Vice President of Art Education Australia and the Tasmanian Art Teachers Association, and it's been wonderful to collaborate through AEA to develop a Google document, which is an open collaborative space where people can share and build a whole platform of resources, which has really exploded. And then working with Tasmanian art teachers through the school holidays, while they have built this incredible bank of online, offline and off-device resources to share with all of their colleagues locally and nationally and internationally. That was a real joy to witness that collaborative care that is really just it is so necessary at the moment, and I think people are doing a really incredible job of helping each other. So that's me.
Wonderful, thank you. Alan, over to you.
I'm somewhat in a similar situation as Steve, building the bicycle as I try to ride it, as far as the internet is concerned. In the art education program at the University of Kentucky, part of the training for students is that they acquire 200 hours of field experiences. Those 200 hours afford them the opportunity to go out and observe in the schools. And part of that observation for them is to collect data and analyze that data as it relates to learning, high quality learning, and why learning takes place, why it's not taking place, and analyze that whole situation. So imagine the challenge when the pandemic hits, where they had to go now online with schools closed and everything like that. They cannot go out to complete their field experience. So one of the things that I did was pull up some videos with teaching taking place all over the world, art education, teaching taking place all over the world, and have them analyze these videos, right? And part of this actually helped them to be more internationally connected, in a sense, because most of our students do come from the state of Kentucky in rural areas. And the notion of a global community is a little foreign to them. And so this, the joy of watching them explore outside of the boundaries on the internet, and ask questions about, well, what is taking place in another country? Why is it that we're doing things the same way we are doing things here and other countries are doing the same? And what that allowed me to do is start engaging them in what the new normal might look like. And as we go through that process, I'm struck by the lessons that we are now learning through the pandemic. One, you have people who actually go out there and want to go back to work, disregarding all the instructions that, you know, you spread the virus when you come into contact. And the second is that you have people who go out there and they face the virus in spite of the dangers, and they're helping one another get through all of this. And the other is the fear that most people do have. And when I think about that and discuss these issues with them, what seems to come out of that is the new normal on the other side, what it should look like if we're truly going to have a global community that is advanced and one that respects different cultures, one that will take into consideration the advancement of each of us, right? And it is showing up in the most unusual places, the hospitals, the fearlessness in which individuals helping others with the virus, knowing that they could be the next. The shop worker who actually put food on the shelves for each of us so that we can survive. The sanitation workers who gets out there and makes sure that the environment that we live in is one that is hospitable. And it comes across as the fact that every single person is valued, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they do. And the joy about it is that they are seeing this in real time. And it is a testament, I believe, to what they need to look forward to in a global community. And as budding art educators, what the model that they should have in mind as they prepare their students going out there. So part of it is an issue that I had from a long time ago in terms of how the education enterprise functions and how it functions to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is not good enough, right? And it seems as if, as Robinson says, that we created the environment we live in, the world, the human world we live in, and we can recreate it. So my goal through training of my students, whether online, offline, where they are, is to expose them to what it will take to be a part of reshaping this global community, one where you have peace, justice, protecting the environment, and making sure that everybody as a fair shot of advancing.
Thank you, Alan. I don't think I've ever had tears in a webinar before, so thank you for that. The energy is definitely strong here, Steve. Our interconnection and all of the things that we've spoken about, particularly Abby's leaning into practice, definitely just happened. Alan, thank you. Marianne, over to you.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks everyone. This is such a multi-layered discussion, and there's so many ways into it. I guess my contribution I felt might be around the ways in which drama education and our understandings of embodied practice and affect, the role of affect in what we do, is kind of central. Might be a kind of way into, I guess, talking about this from the perspective of my colleagues and also myself when we were first thrown into online work from a practice that was embodied. And that was a kind of shift for me from having a presence to being present. And I'll come back to that in a second. But what I had to go through to lean into that was kind of like the 7 stages of grieving. So that first sense of like there being shock, like how the hell can drama go online? Denial, drama can't go online. Anger, I am so not doing drama online. Bargaining, which is what happened in our institution. Okay, I'll do drama online if we can keep it there as a subject area. Depression, this is crap, and it was, continues to be in some ways. In the stage of testing, okay, what if I can try this? What if we actually bring together these Zoom spaces? What if we use the screen as a, you know, an element of drama in itself, so that if we put our hands on the sides of the boxes that we're sitting in a Zoom space with, we're actually creating dynamic, embodied ways of communicating that is not just relying on a head on top of a body. And then acceptance, which was what is possible. How can the elements of drama be shared online? And rather than teaching to, it's a really, it's a reminder that we don't teach to, we engage with, we walk with an educational endeavour. We walk with question making, not just question answering. And that, I think, is the real threat about shifting to online, is that we fall back into a delivery mode and a presentational mode of education where it's an educational delivery rather than a questioning around not only do we have presence online, so how often are we there, how accessible is it to us or to our students, but actually about being present. How are we engaging and being present with the materiality around us here? How do we decenter the human head in the ways in which we might communicate, engage with heart and affect in this teaching environment? And what's this interface, and how can it lead to an interbeing? So that's something to share.
Beautiful, thank you. And a lovely follow-on from Alan's opening around, I think, being present and how we be present in multiple sites is such a big issue for all of us at the moment. Amanda.
Hi, so I sort of approached this question that you posed with my location where I live here in a very large urban suburban area. There, you know, in Dallas-Fort Worth, we have tons of arts organizations and institutions. So I sort of put together like a couple of very practical examples. So I use a mix of synchronous and asynchronous online practices. And at my university, we have free access to Canvas and Microsoft Teams. And students have these platforms as well for free. So I can also use Zoom and Skype if necessary. But an example of my teaching from this semester using Canvas and Teams included a museum assignment with the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth. And in the past, this assignment has always taken place in the museum with the education staff and middle schoolers from a local school district. But because of COVID-19, that was impossible to do this semester. So I reached out to the Kimball education staff and asked if they would be willing to do the assignment online. And luckily they were up for the challenge. And now, granted, they were at home, they weren't in the museum, so they were doing this from their own homes as well. So typically the assignment is 4 class days in the museum. Number 1, learning methods and strategies of teaching using object-based and inquiry-based approaches. Number 2, learning and researching about the artwork and objects and how to develop gallery discussions around the artwork and art lessons. Number 3, developing these components so they are geared towards teaching middle schoolers. And then number 4, the middle schoolers come to the museum and my students teach them in person with the artwork there in front of them. So using Teams, we were able to work with the Kimball education staff online, developing all of the steps except for number 4, of course, because we weren't there in person. So also on Teams, students worked with the Kimball education staff together in sort of big groups, and then students also worked in small groups on their own. So students did research using the Kimball's website and other resources. And step number 4 concluded with students teaching to myself and the Kimball education staff on Teams, doing everything they normally would do in the museum, but just on this online platform. I think that even though step 4 was online, or, you know, we had to do it online, it was in the future, given more time to develop this assignment, with the lack of having the students available, I think it could be easily taught online to middle schoolers. So the takeaway from this example is that with creativity and openness, most assignments could be tweaked to teach online. So not only could professors do a similar online project to this, but I think K through 12 teachers could as well. So also I wanted to add another quick example. Many of the student teachers that I have this semester who are not teaching in-person classes in K through 12 are now having to be creative and teach online as well. Many of them have found sort of really interesting resources. A lot of them are using Facebook Live to teach lessons online, which are quite successful. Other teachers, parents, etc., from all over the world can watch these Facebook Live sessions or lessons that they're teaching. I think it's a really good resource because there are a lot of parents at home or other teachers, and so they can pull or draw from this. And the last takeaway, although I mentioned that most assignments can be tweaked to teach online, this is totally dependent, and this goes back to what Steve was saying, on students' access to resources like software and hardware, art materials and supply, and internet connections. So I think that's something to always consider with the teaching online platforms. Thank you.
Awesome. A cut through on all of this is this how we lean in, but how we lean in to ensure some equity and access in that seems to be a common thread for all of us at the moment. Bill, over to you.
Thanks, Kate. Gee, we have some amazing colleagues, don't we? I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own practices and how that's evolved over time, I guess. One of the things I really try to do in that online space is to create really positive and respectful spaces where students can engage and feel encouraged to experiment. For example, one of the things I try to do is I try to move away from text-based communication where I possibly can. And so one of the first things I do on a Monday morning is I do a 3-minute video in one of my units that outlines the content for the coming week, and which I can suggest some positive strategies for students to use in their learning. I don't usually respond to discussion board posts anymore using text. I again use these really quick, focused videos. And in all of my video posts, I always ensure that I use the student's name. I refer to specific aspects of their artwork or their reflective practices, and I provide positive feedback about how they can move forward. And the feedback I get from my students is that that really helps break through that, you know, the fourth wall, and helps them feel far more connected. Another way that I try to engage students is through really preparing the online space pedantically, ensuring that I've included lots of different ways, multimodal ways for students to engage in content. So, for example, my colleagues and I have recorded some professionally videographed and edited videos of us actually making artwork and making music, such as helping someone learn a simple nursery rhyme, or demonstrating how to create an armature or a collage. And once again, the feedback we get from students is that that does help them feel part of something, part of an online community, or a community, albeit online. The other thing I try to keep in my online spaces is lots of images and recordings from previous cohorts, so that I find it helps alleviate student anxiety, because they see examples of where they can be, of the standard, if you will, that is required, and that does alleviate their anxiety. I guess the other thing I try to do is I try to relate all of the arts making practices that we do inextricably to assessment. And so in order to complete their assessment, students have to show that they have done them. So whether that is through mobile phone technology, through video of them singing or playing something, or of photographic images of their in-progress artwork. So a little example of that, the final assessment in one of my units is for students to plan, teach, record, and reflect on a 10-minute arts teaching session. They choose what that's about, and it's because it's a first year unit, they only do it with maybe between 1 and 3 children, and that is a culminating performance for them. So it's an example of where they've come from and where they are now. And it builds progressively on their previous assessments. I guess I would encourage teachers in this space to create really welcoming, positive, multimodal spaces for their students to engage. And I guess my last comment would be, you know, whilst there are lots of potentialities in the online space, it can also be really challenging and really time consuming to do well. And so I'd say, you know, above all, give yourself time to learn and allow yourself to fail, and try to be as authentic to yourself in your engagement with your students. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Jonathan, over to you.
I'm just so honored to be with such inspiring colleagues. It's so great to hear. I could have just listened the rest of the evening. What strikes me is how still my body is right now. And that's not the way that I teach. That's not the way that you teach. And so an adjustment I think that all of us need to make is how do we interact virtually with our bodies differently than we would act in the classroom. I know that I move around a lot, and perhaps one nice result of teaching online is that we're forced to take care of our bodies differently, going for a walk or doing yoga. I've been doing yoga online, and that's really interesting. But just like the rest of you, I think we're all passionate about bringing the passion in our students and replenishing their artistic identities and seeing how they connect the creative process to empathy and environmental and social justice and global citizenry and so forth, and wrestle with that sense of interplay, the dance of play and absorption and flexibility, freedom and structure. One of the things that I chose to do, and maybe you'll give me liberty, I might stretch into the next question about what gives us joy and hope, is that I went to my former students to see what they're doing in the trenches and finding out how they're interacting with their students virtually. All of us try to teach to resiliency and make sure our students are flexible and resourceful and using their own creative talents. So it was interesting for me to hear from them, their stories about their teaching online. And a couple things, characteristics that came out, I thought were quite interesting. One is that they, all of a sudden they were considering their students' circumstances differently than they would before. So do students have internet at home? What kind of art supplies do they have? How does the family structure impact their potential art making? They also addressed their role as teachers in a collaborative environment. What's the role of an art teacher? Somehow they were able to give perspective on that. Then, of course, when you're teaching online, 45 minutes is out the window. It has a completely different sense of what time is. So their typical arrangement where students come down to their classroom for 45 minutes is not going to work. So that time can be empowering for their students to get involved and absorbed in the projects that they have. And then they also were beginning to think of themselves as more interdisciplinary and bringing in culture more and bringing in different subjects. Perhaps they gave themselves permission to do that. So if I may take just a second and share a little bit about what gave me hope and joy about their stories and maybe ideas for others. So one of my former students is a cartoonist as well, and she decided to break the third wall, maybe working from one dimension into 3-dimension. And she created this project called 6 Feet Apart, and obviously the last 3 letters of apart is art. And so she initially thought she would set up an easel outside of her house and inspire students with her cartoon and a little poetry, such as George Seurat, Like to Dot a Lot, or George O'Keeffe, Big Flower, Big Leaf. She works with elementary students, so mostly, let's say, 5 to 10 years old. She was inspired enough to contact the local Park and Recreation Commissioner and received permission to set up her easels in a nearby park so that her students could go by and see these cartoons that she gave. And I actually have some on a PowerPoint, but I'm not going to show them right now. And to look at these and be inspired by doing artwork based on these particular artists. So that's one inspiration. Another inspiration is from a former student who was currently a middle school teacher, and those would probably be ages 10 to 14 or so. And she decided to raise the issue of the coronavirus and find out how they are reacting to it, and then to have them do some drawings based on their reactions, and really asking them to really think about what this whole crisis is doing for them. And they created drawings around such impressions such as, I cannot participate in sports, or everything is taking away from us. I can't see my friends. So that was a very direct way to interact the coronavirus with her teaching online. And so they would then submit them and present them back to her. The other thing that recognized too is that she didn't have to teach specifically to a particular age. So if she had multiple students from different age groups, she could create an assignment, such as an Andy Goldsworthy create sculptures from a nearby lake. And so that a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old could participate in a particular way. The last share I'll do is from a former student who's teaching in elementary, and she's had her students create pop-up cards. And so she directed them on how to create pop-up cards. And then with the pop-up cards, she would ask these students to bring them to a neighbor who, obviously an older neighbor who wouldn't be able to leave her house. And she said that was just an incredibly powerful experience that she probably wouldn't have been able to do without this. So these 4 or 5 examples have really given me hope and inspiration based on what my former students are doing in the classroom.
And how beautiful. It's like a lovely connective thread of all of the ideas that have been talked about today have been present in those practices that those teachers are affording their students as well. Abby has just left us, so we're going to tie ourselves together. Are there any last thoughts that you'd like to share before we close up and wrap up, and obviously continue this online afterwards? So I'll just open the floor. Bill.
Thanks, Kate. And thank you, everyone. Jonathan, there were some lovely moments in that. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about one of my students. It's a pseudonym, Rebecca, but she'd been in my unit twice before, and on both occasions she hadn't completed the unit. When we did all of these pedagogic change about 3 or 4 years ago, she came back into the unit as an online student. And one of the tasks we asked them to do was in an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures module, where they had to respond to a powerful Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander song visually and relate that to a lesson plan. So Rebecca Took the Children Away, which is an amazing anthemic song by Aboriginal composer and performer Archie Roach, and she chose to do it through collage and paint. And I've given Kate a copy of Rebecca's work, and it's really beautiful. It's painterly, it's on a sort of a grid, and it's just really, really powerful. Anyway, I got an email 6 months later. By the way, Rebecca passed the unit and did really, really well. She had some really nice deep thinking that she was involved in. Anyway, this is the email she sent me. Hi Bill, I'm currently on prac and I'm currently setting up some lessons around early explorers, convicts and the conflict between Europeans and Aboriginals. The children have grasped the concept of children being taken away. So you would be pleased to know I'm going to use Archie Roach's song, Took the Children Away, and ask the children to pick up keywords within the song and draw a mind map. And I just thought that's exactly what we want from our students, is to be going out there and showing what they've learned and helping, you know, children to do the same sort of stuff. So that really filled me with a great deal of joy. Thanks.
Fantastic. Steve.
just for a few seconds, because I know we're out of time. I just want to put in a shout out for hashtag Draw Closer. It's an InSEA initiative to get people to share artwork, and also the Arts Education Week's coming up with UNICEF to be aware of the sharing that's going on with that. And then just two tiny things that I've noted that has happened here that may be shared globally. And one was our sculpture professor encouraged everyone in the community to make a lawn sculpture. And then when they did that, they filled out a little didactic, and then she GPSed it. So you could drive all through these neighborhoods and see the sculpture and read the didactic while you're parked or driving by. So I thought that was something applicable in many locations. And then the other thing, and I wish I was smart enough to come up with myself, but it wasn't me, is our teacher took her easel, like a elementary size easel with the rolling paper, took it down to the end of her sidewalk on the edge of the street with a cart of materials, and invited anyone who walked by to make art. So I thought that that was another way that we can really humanize the aspect of storytelling through narrative, whether it's dance or drama or visual. And then we can share that globally. So I don't know what she's going to do with all the flip pages. Maybe it'll be an online gallery somewhere. So that's it for me. Thank you, Kate, for inviting me. It's been always such a pleasure to be with such esteemed colleagues. And I hope that we connect through social media ourselves and share our work.
I would love to see so many stories that come from you and our colleagues once this is posted through InSEA, because every one of us have these examples of what it looks like to be present. And the presence to being present, Marianne, I will live long with. I have this giant page of notes from all of you today, so thank you.